everybody, welcome to the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. I am Griff from GA. Joining me today, Sergi from Pro Wrestling Musings, and I have a feeling that we're not in Kansas anymore because we were in Boston doing that's not my best work. The point is, it was a Halloween themed week of AEW, and we have lots of Halloween themed things to talk about, starting with the main event of AEW Dynamite. This divided opinions, or at least I think it divided opinions. I'm not quite sure how people felt about that, but that's why we're here to discuss. It was the massive 8-man tag match between the Dark Order and the Elite. Personally, anytime the Elite are doing anything, it's good news for me. I love everything these guys do, and the Dark Order are just such great baby faces. This match, I loved it. I really enjoyed this. I know that sentiment wasn't shared by everyone, but at least for me, it really worked doing what it was supposed to do.
For sure. You know, I definitely question. I've heard the criticisms secondhand in terms of, getting a lot of things in my Twitter feed about, people are criticizing this match for this and that, and I disagree. Not a lot of firsthand, I didn't like this for these reasons. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I really kind of question how much those criticisms are good faith ones and how much they're just from people who criticize AEW for anything that they can think of, because they have a bias, they have an axe to grind. But as far as that goes, if we take it at face value and assume that these are good faith criticisms, I just feel like if you didn't like that, AEW might not be for you, just in the sense of this is what they're going for. Mm-hmm. This mix of fun but also dramatic, and dramatic in the sense of it worked as a story. It was fun, but it also worked as dramatic storytelling.
Yes,
that's what they're going for. That's the mix that they've been working on, and they've perfected. If it was too wacky, it's like, you might want to find something that's more sports oriented. I know that AEW is supposed to be sports oriented, but when they said sports oriented, they just meant we want to bring in these elements from real sports. Yeah. Not that we want to push out the silliness. You know what I'm saying? They've never meant we don't want to be silly. Real sports can be silly sometimes. Whatever works, right?
Absolutely.
But in terms of like, hey, we want to do a promotional thing, and we're going to, we're going to have Batman here or whatever. Like that's not unique to wrestling, but that's a separate subject. Point being, they did a fantastic job of doing what they do, which is, have fun and also just tell the story. And here the story was the story of Cowboy Adam Page, just a fantastic story they've been telling for months and months, for years really, and this is one of the most exciting and fun chapters of that story.
Yeah, exactly right. I think whether this match strayed into the too wacky or something like that, I get it if someone is sitting there saying, I was hoping that from a main event angle I would get more of a serious wrestling sort of storyline. I mean, I get it, but again, I'm with you. If this wasn't for you, then maybe AEW as a whole isn't for you, because this is what AEW does. I mean, there's times where their main event is deadly serious, and this is what they're doing. I mean, there's times where, Jon Moxley is getting his eye poked out and having to wear an eye patch and stuff like that. Like, there's times where it's really serious, and there's times, especially with Kenny Omega as champion, where the main event scene can get, very wacky. And for me, it's funny. It's great because these guys know exactly what they're doing. And the match, I think, stayed firmly on the side of funny and not like kayfabe breaking or anything like that. They're not. We've seen in indie promotions, places like DDT and Chikara and places like that, where, if these guys had come out dressed like the Ghostbusters, they'd actually like use the proton packs and like cross the streams and stuff like that. They didn't go that far. All right. The one thing they used them for was legitimate. I mean, these things are made out of plastic and metal, and they used them to hit people. They used them as weapons, and it makes total sense because this is the same company that I'm pretty sure has used Legos as weapons before. And if you've ever stepped on Legos, if you've ever like had a child with a costume like run into you, you know that it does hurt. So all of that aside, I'm with you. The idea of the story they were trying to tell was the story of Hangman Page and Kenny Omega, and it was encapsulated in this match where you had the Elite continuing to cheat, continuing to, just put down the Dark Order, even though the Dark Order, given the numbers here, seemed to be better wrestlers than the Elite overall in terms of how they were dealing with this match. I mean, if you look at the big offense, for example, the Dark Order led in the big offense category. They led in total offense. The Dark Order got a lot on the Elite here, but of course the Elite cheat and they get the upper hand. And then of course you get that final moment where Hangman takes off the costume, and what I loved was Matt Jackson's reaction. Like, he was almost in tears when he realized that it was Hangman Page standing behind him. And it was like all these guys, I mean, they just know how to sell. And again, if it's too much for you, I know that Matt Jackson's selling tends to be a little bit too much for some people. I get it. But I think for most who watch this, it's exactly what they wanted to see. And for me, Matt Jackson's sometimes too much even for me. But this was perfect.
Well, let's see. A couple things about that. First off, you were saying, like, hey, the Dark Order got a lot in considering, the cheating and et cetera, et cetera. They did get the win, right? I mean, they came out on top at the end.
That's true. That's true.
And that's amazing. I do the factions breakdowns and ranking the factions for Pro Wrestling Musings once a month. I need to do that this month, and they're going to shoot up Dark Order because, I mean, this is not anywhere I would have expected them to be at this point. Dark Order a month ago was falling apart, and now a victory over the Elite, that's amazing. That's huge. Yeah, and the other thing about it is that we're not just, I mean, there's a lot of great storytelling that happened here, but the big thing is it gave Hangman Adam Page a chance to show that he can outthink and outsmart the Elite, that he can stay a step ahead of them and their games, and play some games himself. And that's really cool to see. And it led up to a moment, I know I said that this, in some of the conversations I was having about this match, that, this is a case of history repeats itself, first as tragedy and then as farce. The part that everybody loved, where Hangman Adam Page is in the shot behind Matt Jackson, is shot for shot just like Kurt Angle's debut in TNA, where Joe comes up behind him with blood coming down his face, and Kurt Angle doesn't know he's there. It was a great moment, and just really well put together and shot and dramatic in a funny way.
It's great to see a smart babyface, isn't it? I think
Yeah,
for so long we had these baby faces, not in AEW but elsewhere. We had these baby faces that were so stupid. Like, the heels constantly got one over on them, and it was like, how do you not understand what the heels are doing or what the game is? It's great to see a babyface. We saw it first with Jon Moxley, who, rather than just, outthinking the heels at times, he sometimes was just like, yeah, I know what you're doing, and I don't care. And now Hangman Page is outthinking the heels. And it's great because it makes you care about him that much more, that he is able to get one over on the heels. And this is a great way to, again, present him as a legitimate threat to Kenny Omega, which we have to remember. I mean, we might all believe that he is, knowing what we know about him. But even if you're new to AEW, if you are not familiar with the way this story has gone between Hangman Page and Kenny Omega, the more you see him, the more you realize this guy is, a legitimate world championship contender. And can I just say also, by the way, Colt Cabana, we haven't seen a whole lot of him in AEW. He was so great in this match. I loved Colt in this match, playing Brandon Cutler and using the cold spray and all that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff, again, it's a great balance between your main event babyface in Hangman Page, and he's running wild and he's kicking ass, and at the same time you juxtapose him with guys that do all this comedy stuff that, really, really funny. Like, to me, in good taste comedy stuff. And all of that, I think, makes for a match that, again, if the point is to get people excited to see Hangman Page versus Kenny Omega at Full Gear, for me, this match did exactly that.
Yeah, mission accomplished.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Not that for most of us, it's a match that needed a lot of selling, but
right.
It doesn't hurt to build it up even more, which this definitely succeeded at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the greatest matches of all time, a lot of them, and I'm not saying necessarily that Omega versus Page is going to be that, but just for comparison's sake, there's a lot of them that you would say, well, yeah, that didn't need a whole lot of build. For example, Omega Okada. You just look at those two guys, you say, yeah, put them in the ring, it'll be a great match. It didn't need a lot of build. Okay, that's true, but what makes it an all-time great match? It's the build, right? And the same thing for Flair and Steamboat, and all of these things, all of these great matches of all time. The differentiating factor, even if you have two great workers in there, is the build to the match. So even though, yeah, we don't need a whole lot of selling, us, the AEW faithful, they don't need to sell us on this match. Even then, a great build makes for a better match. And by the way, I also want to mention this graph just real quick, because I can't get through a match that we have stats on without mentioning the graph. It's so chaotic, it's so up and down, and to me that's exactly what they wanted to create in this match. They just wanted offense from both sides, and you see where this is landing. You'll see other graphs during the podcast where your peaks are at 15 to 20 in offensive spots in a minute, and your average is 5 to 7. In this one, the average is 20. Your peaks are up above 30. That's how much offense is happening in this match, and it's constantly switching, constantly going back and forth. Again, just trying to create that chaotic feeling between Dark Order and the Elite, and I think they did that.
Yeah. And it's amazing, like I said, seeing Dark Order at this level, holding the Elite at pushing the Elite to their limit and overcoming the Elite of all factions to be able to say, and they said 2 years ago, this is the feud. This feud is going to happen, and you're going to love it, even though you don't believe it now. Remember, they said that about the Dark Order. It's going to be the Elite versus Dark Order in a couple years, and you're going to love it more than you realize. And, this is not how we thought that would look, but it still is amazing.
Yeah, you are absolutely right about that. I didn't even remember that was the top, but yeah, I certainly wouldn't have seen it coming at the time. So we have a lot of praise, obviously, for the way that main event went on Dynamite. The main event of Rampage, though, didn't get the same level of support that the main event on Dynamite got. And I have a few theories about that. So the Rampage main event was, of course, Britt Baker versus Abaddon in a trick-or-treat match. It was no disqualification, and if Abaddon won, she would get a world title shot against Baker. This match didn't really work for me for several reasons. And I mean, everyone, if you've listened to this podcast before, I love Britt Baker. She's my favorite women's wrestler right now by a wide margin. So anytime she's in action, I'm excited for it, whatever the match is. But here's my few issues with this match. Number one, it was played a little bit too seriously. And that's an issue that I have with Abaddon always, is that in a company where the constant talking point is who is the better wrestler, whether it's the men's world champion, the women's world champion, the TNT champion, the tag team champions, it's always who is the better wrestler. And yeah, there's gimmicks, but when you look at the title picture, it's always the best wrestler who ends up with the belt, whether it's Jericho, Moxley, Omega, Rhodes, Allin, Lee, Baker, Shida, Lucha Brothers. It's always the better wrestler. So Abaddon being in there just doesn't work, because she's a goofy gimmick, right? I mean, she's played seriously, but she's a zombie. That's what she is. So putting her in a title picture doesn't make a whole lot of sense given who else is usually in the title picture. So that's one thing. Another thing is putting Britt Baker in a no disqualification match with Jamie Hayter and Rebel there. I'm usually willing in a no DQ match to suspend my disbelief about why doesn't the heel just have all of their friends come out and do like a 10-on-1 beatdown. Normally I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for that, even though it's stupid that usually that's not what happens, even though that could easily happen. But for Britt Baker, she brings Rebel and Jamie Hayter out with her. She clearly has no issues with Rebel and Jamie Hayter getting involved in any way. So why are they not constantly involved? Like that, in this case, it really bothered me that they were not just in the ring constantly. There was no explanation given. They didn't even do something where like Abaddon snuck up behind them and hit them both with a kendo stick or something, like to try to remove them from the match. They were just standing there doing nothing. And again, that took me out of the match. And the third thing that really removed me from the match is I never once believed that Abaddon was going to win this thing. I mean, there was nothing for me to make me believe that she was going to win. And I had totally forgotten that Britt Baker already has a match for Full Gear. So maybe if she didn't have an opponent, I'd be a little bit more willing to believe that maybe there'd be some stuff going on here. But yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it just didn't work for me.
I mean, fair enough. Not if it's not for you, it's not for you. But I think that last criticism especially is unfair. I think that 90% of the matches that we see, we have a really strong idea of who's going to win. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything negative for the match. It's great when you go into a match and you have a real bit of uncertainty, but it's not something that they can accomplish on a regular basis. It wasn't very likely that Abaddon was going to win, because that wasn't very likely that they had any need to see a second match between the two. This one not no DQ, and this one actually for the title. That's not any reason. There's no reason why it needed to go there. The only reason it was a match happening now really was, it's a good Halloween theme to do. Like, hey, it's Halloween. Let's bring out our spooky wrestler, and let's give Britt Baker. The thing is that Britt Baker is this weird amalgamation of babyface and heel. I mean, she's completely heelish, but is treated like a babyface, and that depending on how you look at it, you could look at it as the heel getting some comeuppance by having to deal with something that she doesn't want to deal with. A extremely violent wrestler who's going to, potentially cause her harm. It's like a no DQ match, but also on the flip side of that, from those who see her more in a babyface light, it's a big challenge for her. Like, this is a challenge for her to overcome. And it works in that sense. This was Abaddon isn't presented as so much a competitor as a someone to fear, someone to avoid if you can, and deal with if you can't avoid. I thought it was funny. Chris Jericho did say, it sounded silly coming from him, but he did say, even in a no DQ match, there's
he said there's a protocol. There's a
protocol.
Even in a no DQ match.
There are things that you just don't do, and I think that as far as the side people staying out of it, that's just Britt Baker's pride is what's intended to be what that's about. Like, yes, they cause interference and they do things behind the ref's back and they do this, but I want it to seem like I did this mostly by myself. And that's just her pride, I think, is if you want a kayfabe reason, why they don't do it that way. But
I mean, it's fair enough. That didn't come across to me. Maybe I'm being a little too cynical with that. I have been known to do that at times. Statistically, and before I get to that, also, these poor women with the table spot. I mean, that is just, like, I felt so bad for them. I felt so bad.
Twice.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that Baker does the swinging neck breaker through the table, which, by the way, violated the rule of whoever sets up the table goes through it. You got to throw that in every once in a while. So she does that and the table doesn't break. And I'm just like, all right, first of all, I hope they didn't, like, I hope they're okay, because that's not a great landing. But then I see they're about to do it again. I'm like, wow, all right, Britt Baker really gets it. She knows that people want to see someone go through this table, so she's going to make it happen. And it still doesn't break. Abaddon's full weight is put onto that table with the suplex, and it still doesn't go. I felt so bad for them after that spot.
That's gotta be the sturdiest table ever.
I love how Jericho actually said the table is the toughest thing in this room. Like, that's... it's one thing about AEW commentary that I really like, is I think they're the best in the world, probably the best I've ever seen, at just going with the flow of whatever happens in a match. Whether it's a botch or whatever happens, commentary 90% of the time makes it sound like it was supposed to happen. Like no matter how botchy it looked, this was the plan. And I think that's a real strength. Really, I think that's a real strength of Excalibur. I think working on the indies for so many years like he did, he understands all of the myriad ways in which things can go wrong, and I think everyone really feeds off of that. So credit to Excalibur. I think he really makes the commentators better, and so Jericho, Starks, Taz, all of these guys, they know how to react if things go wrong. All that being said, from a statistical perspective, I think this match was a little slower than it should have been, or like when you look at the numbers, it's kind of weird how it shakes out. So Abaddon has almost 2/3 of the match offense, 61%, which, as we know in AEW, they like to do this for babyfaces, although I guess you'd call Abaddon a babyface. I don't really know what she is in this match in particular, because, like you said, Britt's the heel, but she's cheered like she's a babyface, so it's always weird. But so that makes it even weirder that there's such a discrepancy in the offensive percentage. At the same time, Abaddon doesn't get a single strike down, which is weird because she's played as like a power wrestler, given her size and her intimidating, stature. She didn't get a single strike down in this match. Yet, Baker doubles her up in big offense. Abaddon has more taunts. Baker has more weapons. Like, it's weird the way that this went. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying it's bad. Again, like you said, if it works for you, it works for you. It's just not what you would generally expect from a no DQ match like this.
Well, Abaddon's just a really unusual wrestler in a lot of ways. I mean, she's someone that they'll say she's gotten this many wins, and just she is fed enhancement talent after enhancement talent, and that's it. Except once in a while, they'll give her a big marquee match against Sheeta a few months ago, and against Baker now, and I think those are the only ones. I'd love to see her in more mid-card matches and not just fed enhancement talent, but I think that they feel that would expose the gimmick too much to have her lose, other than to the very best. It's fine for her to lose to someone like Sheeta or Baker, but they put her in with Layla Hirsch, and they're like, well, who loses then? It makes the character and the gimmick kind of limited, unfortunately. I'd love for them to figure out a way to get around that better.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and it's your classic issue of how do we treat a wrestler who's not on the main event scene, but also can't lose on their way to being in the main event scene. Like, I think they're having that same issue with Malachi Black, and we'll talk about him later on. But yeah,
it's definitely an example of the same thing. It's like, it would be bad for him to lose much, but who do you feed him?
Right. Like, he's got to lose at some point, and this is now going to be our second Samoa Joe comparison in this show already, which is fine with me. More Samoa Joe, the better. But he was the same way. When it came to giving Samoa Joe his first loss, you're talking about, okay, so if this guy's not the champion, if he's still a main event level player, how many times is he going to lose? Every loss diminishes the aura that he's created. It's the same deal with Malachi Black and the same deal with Abaddon. So this one, I mean, obviously don't have an issue with her losing. I would much prefer Ty Conti versus Britt Baker at Full Gear rather than Abaddon versus Britt Baker at Full Gear or really anywhere else. So yeah, I mean, my mind is still open to being convinced that Abaddon has something, because I do think she has a unique look. Obviously, she has a character that is not even attempted by anyone else in AEW, so at least there's unique stuff there. So I'm open to AEW getting her over for me. Just it hasn't happened yet. I mean, for me personally. For you, it can be completely different, but for me personally, she's not over with me yet.
Well, I agree on a certain level. Like I was saying, it's a difficult character to work with in terms of figuring out how to fit her into the stories in ways that doesn't hurt her mystique. And they've done their best with that and just feeding her enhancement talents and then throwing her against someone who's at the very top level where it's okay for her to lose, like a Sheeta or a Baker. But for me, she's a lot of fun. She has a great moveset that fits her character. She has an incredible commitment to the character. I really felt that this Halloween match, what's the word I'm looking for? Highlighted that really well in the way that Britt Baker was like, I can have people dress up as zombies too, and that'll be equivalent to what you do. Just basically saying, you're just someone in a makeup job. I've got two people with makeup jobs. How is that not better? And then you see the difference, just the level of, well, whether you think this is a real zombie or not, my makeup's better and I have greater commitment to the character than your people who are just growling a little bit, And it really highlighted just what makes her unique.
That's a really great. I hadn't actually even thought of that, but you're absolutely right. That actually, in retrospect, makes me enjoy the match a little bit more. So thank you for that. So speaking of former world champion Hikaru Shida, she was in action on Dynamite as part of the TBS title tournament against her old nemesis Serena Deeb. This for me was the best singles match on Dynamite, and these two, like, it would be so easy for AEW to put them on a collision course for the finals of the TBS title tournament. Like, that would be your first inclination when you see a feud going into a tournament, is to say, well, let's just make that the final match then. But I like that AEW decided to go a different way with it. I like that they've decided to give us this now, and so that we can have this feud and also have a different thing as part of the title tournament. And this match, I think, really lived up to what a lot of people were hoping for it. We know how good these two women are, and I think this match really showed that not only are they, tremendously talented in their own right, but you put them together and they're able to give you different things. They're able to do different things every time they're in the ring. What was markedly different about this match, I felt, was Serena Deeb was the heel the whole time, without question. She was playing the heel. It wasn't like a baby face with fire like she has done before. I mean, she was fouling. She gave up a lot of offense to Shida, which, as we've said, AEW likes to do. Baby faces on fire. They like to have him throw tons of strikes. They like to have him do that. But, Deeb, she's getting the heat. Lots of submissions. Shida didn't get a single submission in this match. Deeb went for almost a minute in an 11-minute match. So you're talking about almost 10% of this match was just Serena Deeb, doing submissions. So this is a character I really like with Serena Deeb. Obviously, the Woman of 1,000 Holds nickname is a callback to Dean Malenko. This reminds me of heel Dean Malenko, the way that he worked. So obviously, Shida goes on, wins the match, but then the post-match angle, I think Shida's out of the tournament, is what was announced after this, as Serena Deeb went back at her knee, attacked the knee, and so I think I heard that Shida's out. I don't know if that's for sure, but either way, getting the heat back after the match, I thought this was really great. It won me over about halfway through, and I really liked the story, and I really liked the match, and I'm really curious where this goes from here.
Yeah, I haven't really I know a lot of the guys have been doing bracketology and making predictions. I haven't really done that. I'm just
Hmm.
really uncertain where they're going with this. But if both wrestlers are out, and that gives the other side of whatever they were going to conflict with the next level of the bracket, basically a bye, which is
Yep.
funny because there's four wrestlers who already have a bye in this tournament. You've got this 16 or 12 person tournament, 12 competitor tournament. There was a lot of talk like, is it going to be eight
Hmm.
person? Is it going to be 16 competitors? But they split the difference and did this, four top ranked competitors get a bye to the second round, and that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. And then if you get Sheeta out, then you've got a fifth bye basically. So that's interesting. I definitely agree with you that this is, one of the best matches of the night. Only the main event is in the conversation of possibly being the match of the night.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but at the same time, it's like, match of the week, probably not. We've got Rampage to look at.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
you know,
And we'll get
it's
there.
it
We will
was
get there.
fun. It was a good match. It probably wasn't. It's probably not one of the ones that's going to be remembered as one of the greatest. But it was
Hmm.
really close. It was one of those borderline, like, is this going to be remembered for years, or is this going to be just this week's, conversation?
Yeah.
Uh, but what it convinced me of is that you're right about Deeb, in the sense that my idea would be more like, well, do we really need to turn her? She can be sort of tweenerish. She could be more
Hmm.
shades of gray. But between this match and the previous match between the two, that was more shades of gray. This one was definitely better. Was definitely more fun.
Hmm.
Definitely. Just the better all around match, and which isn't to say anything that their first meeting was also really good too.
Hmm.
But despite my inclination to say, does she really need to be full heel? It definitely made for a better match, as you know. So that's won me over, as far as to D being the full on heel.
Hmm. One thing that I thought was interesting as we take a look at the graph, it's rare in AEW for heels, especially newly turned heels, to immediately start giving up a lot of offense. We said that baby faces tend to get a lot of, like, what they tend to do in AEW. They will have baby faces throw tons of strikes, and that will drive their offensive percentage up. But usually, when you look at both the big offense and the graph, it tells a much different story. It's usually much more even, if not in favor of the heels, especially newly turned heels. But this one, when you look at the graph, I mean, Sheeta is dominant for most of the match. There is not a protracted heat segment the way that you would normally expect, especially from a wrestler with the character of Serena Deeb, that you would expect, oh, there'd just be a section in this match where, Deeb is just, has her in submission, and Sheeta can't do anything about it. And that does happen for 1 minute in the third minute of the match. And that's it. And then Sheeta gets the heat back, and she's basically doing a comeback for like half this match. So I think maybe they're building towards that much more classic babyface heel dynamic, where you've got lots of heat and then a comeback and then you're finished, and they're thinking that's what we want to do for a blow off, and maybe it'll be in a stipulation match. So I don't know if that was their thinking. And again, I mean, I've said that I really like this match, so this is not meant as a criticism, just something that's interesting to see about this match, and something that I like about AEW, because again, this is a lot different than you would expect from a babyface heel sort of match, especially one at this point in the feud between these two. But I think AEW's vision, what their goal was in this match, was to give us an entertaining contest, to get us invested in the TBS title tournament. And even if they have to give us a match that's very non-traditional in terms of the place in the feud, I think their thinking was, whatever. Let's give people a match that they will enjoy. So I like that that's the mentality, because it should be the mentality. Let's not let one feud, derail a tournament story, especially because that would be the inclination as they're building the women's division and saying, oh, we've got a feud that people are into. Let's just do that feud. And AEW being patient here, saying, no, let's give them a tournament storyline that they care about. And for me, that worked, because now I care more about the tournament, and I care a lot more about the Serena Deeb Hikaru Shida feud.
For sure, yeah. It's really interesting to see where they're going to go with this. I'm definitely excited to see a TBS champion and who that might end up being, and definitely excited to see a Deeb versus Shida 3. And I wonder if that's going to be at the pay-per-view.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I guess if the angle is Shida not being able to compete in the tournament, if that is the angle, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but if that is the angle, then it would seem to me like doing it at the pay-per-view would be a little bit too soon. So maybe they'll push it back. Maybe they'll do it at, one of those Dynamite special events they like doing. I assume they have one coming towards the end of the year, like Winter is Coming last year. So I don't know that for sure, but we'll see. Who would you at this point, Sergi? I know you're not big on the bracketology, so I'll just ask you the one question. At this point, if you were booking, who would you have win this tournament and become the first TBS champion?
Well, I'm the factions guy, and so I'm thinking, why not Jamie Hayter? Why not have both titles in one faction and do that dominant faction thing in the women's division? It would be interesting to see, all of the other women, all of the babyface women, in the position of having to combat a really dominant faction that's holding all the gold, and kind of keeping all the gold hostage. In a sense,
wow.
Of, working together to prevent anybody else from getting any.
That's interesting, because on the podcast last week, Jamie Hayter's name did not come up at all. I mean, we had several different names thrown in there. I mean, people talking about Ruby Soho. I mentioned Chris Statlander.
I know. Like, I'm the
no
only
one said, no one said that. But I'm down with it, because I'm with you. I like faction storytelling in wrestling, and AEW has yet to pull the trigger on an all the gold storyline in a faction. They got close with the Elite, because you had Kenny Omega as the world champion and the Young Bucks as tag team champions. And I guess you could count the Good Brothers because they were Impact tag team champions at the time. So you got close, but they never quite finished it off with the TNT title. So this would be the first time that AEW is saying an entire division's worth of gold is in one faction with Britt Baker. Granted, it's 2 belts, but still, that's the entire women's division right there. So if they want to give it a try, I'd be down with it. And Jamie Hayter, just as a from a wrestling standpoint, she's obviously a championship level wrestler. I think if you've only been watching AEW, it's been a while since we've seen Hayter and that, pushed at that level. But if you saw any of her stuff, I think with Stardom where she was at before, and any of her stuff early in AEW, yeah, I think she's a TBS champion level wrestler, I think.
Sure, and that's the other thing, is that presuming that the TBS championship is going to be a lot like the TNT championship, we're talking about someone who's going to be wrestling just about every week, and that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We've never really seen that in the women's division before.
True. Even with, a work rate level world champion, someone like a Hikaru Shida, she was not on TV every week, and that was actually a huge criticism of Shida's title reign, is that she wasn't on TV enough. So maybe AEW is looking for a make good in the form of the TBS title. We'll have to see. I think their choice of champion may go a long way into revealing how often they might be wrestling on a week-to-week basis. Speaking of the TNT title, though, and a guy who did wrestle on a week-to-week basis for a long, long time, it was Darby Allin. Now he's shifted gears into this blistering feud with MJF, and one that I certainly enjoy, one that I know that you are enjoying at this point. And I think what's so interesting about this is when you break it down into its component pieces, this is a pretty basic feud. If you were to just if you were to just say at its base level, you have a heel who everyone hates, a babyface who everyone loves, the heel beats him down, we wait a couple weeks, the heel gets heat, the babyface comes back, returns, the fans go nuts. I mean, it sounds basic, but the way that they're executing it, I think, is so much better than just your basic babyface heel feud. And I think that's everything to do with the way these two men have constructed their characters, which we've known about MJF for a long time, but Darby Allin, almost under the radar, has become one of AEW's best babyfaces. And it means that in a feud like this, where it's just his character that's carrying this, there's no title, there's no one else, it's just him and his character, I think he's proven to everyone that he is a main event level babyface anywhere in the world.
I definitely agree with that. And I think that a big part of it is that it's actually about something. A lot of times you'll throw an antagonist and a protagonist together, and why is the antagonist doing it? Well, I don't know. Protagonists bother me. I don't like them because they're too nice or whatever. Just whatever the issue is. I've said for a long time, like, okay, what's the Pinnacle's goal? Where are they going? They need to make it clear that they're after all the gold. That's the whole reason that a group like the Pinnacle would exist. And in a way, this seems to be a distraction from that, but it's not, because MJF is looking ahead, looking beyond the world title to dominance of the world title scene years in the future. Yeah. That's what he's looking at. He's saying, I'm not worried about Kenny Omega, because as I make my ascent, Kenny Omega's going to be too injured he's going to be making his descent. I'm worried about the other guys my age that want the spot I'm going for.
Right.
And I'm going to take them out in advance. That's what MJF is saying, and that makes this really about something. About, okay, who's the real future of this company? Who's the real future of the World Championship? And MJF, is like making a case in the sense that he's willing to think that far ahead, and that's pretty amazing. But he's going against Darby Allin, who is not somebody that's going to be easy to take out, and he's learning that.
That's exactly right. And one thing that is with this feud as well, I mean, obviously on a general level, you have MJF who, wants, as you said, he's thinking down the line and thinking, I need to compete with the younger guys, because, the current world champions are not going to be there in 5 years when I'm world champion. On top of that, though, just from specifically with Darby Allin, this is such a classic storyline between MJF, the guy who grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, the guy who, from the time he started in AEW was anointed as the next great heel in wrestling, AEW superstar for the next 15 years, like that. He was given all of that, versus Darby Allin, who, grew up, had to sleep in his car working on the indies and has been through all this hardcore stuff. And, like the first major thing he did in AEW was have his, had thumbtacks shoved in his mouth and have his mouth duct taped shut and then suplexed off a chair. That's what he was about early on. So it's just such a conflict between these two guys who are different in every single way conceivable. I mean, they probably, one guy likes ketchup on his hot dogs, the other guy likes mustard. These guys are diametrically opposite in every single fashion. And, sometimes with storyline, it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Just give us guys that legitimately are different, that legitimately hate each other, that have two directly opposing goals with what they want to do and how they want to, come out of this feud, and just see what happens, and let their promos in the case of MJF and their selling in the case of Darby Allin really do the hard work, and that's exactly what's going on here. And I think just the execution of these guys, if you had any doubt that this right here is the future of AEW, I think you can pretty much put that doubt to rest. I think these guys are, there's no doubt that you're looking at the future of what AEW is trying to build. So let me ask you, Sergi, you are, of course, the styles make fights guy, so you know the styles of these two men. We've had, at least in the case of Darby Allin, a lot of time. We've a huge sample size for Darby Allin to see what he's about. So as we approach Full Gear, where this match is going to happen, stylistically, what do you expect from these guys? How do you think this match is going to go down?
That's a really good question. Give me a second. Here's the thing with that. Uh, the trouble with Darby Allin is we have a huge sample size, but he has an amazing amount of flexibility. Darby Allin will give you a different match if he feels that a different match is called for by the situation, by the opponent, etc. He just has so many, uh, ways to change it up without seeming not himself, if you know what I mean. I mean, there's a lot of people who I've criticized and said, "Hey, I don't know who you are because you're always changing it up, and I don't know who, that's never the issue with Darby Allin. Darby Allin has many aspects to himself. He's a really good technical wrestler, but at the same time, he's a small guy and a flyer, and needs to fly in order to overcome larger guys. But he's not always with the larger guys, so he brings out the technical side when he's with somebody who's closer to his own size. And then also he's a very gritty guy who, even though babyface breaks the rules more and is very comfortable with weapons and with hardcore style matches. So you've got all those aspects to him. But I mean, if you look at their styles, neither uses strikes a lot. Both are really high on technical wrestling and um, on orthodox offense. They're both, they both break the rules a lot. The places where they're different is that MJF very famously hardly ever leaves his feet. Darby Allin flies a lot. And MJF uses a lot of grapple moves. Darby Allin does not. And the other thing that, like you mentioned, Darby Allin is a big seller. His strategy on offense is the rope-a-dope strategy, in the sense that he gives up a lot of offense, but generally wins in the end. Whereas MJF is most of the time very dominant on offense, and so that's definitely one thing you can for sure expect, is that MJF is going to dominate a lot of the match and that Darby Allin's going to do a lot of selling. It'd be very surprising if that was not the case. But there's going to be some fiery comebacks where Darby Allin takes control again in order to give us something to root for.
Yeah, now I'm seeing one thing that I'm really excited about is the fact that when you look at MJF's style, one of the things that he specializes in that you have is a trait that you term as a stretcher. And that's something that MJF, that's a lot of what he does. And one thing that makes me really excited is the fact that when you have a babyface that's so good at selling, one of the classic way to show that is them getting stretched. And you see the way their body moves and their face and the agony that you're seeing. So it seems that just from a match construction point of view, MJF's style plays directly into what Darby Allin's going to want to do and persuade the fans that he's in dire peril and MJF is, about to snap a limb off or something like that. So when you look at that, first of all, if you could explain what a stretcher is and why that might actually, really work in the contest of this particular match that we're going to see.
Okay. Well, in the sense, when I label it stretcher, that's basically is just the term for a wrestler who uses a lot of submission holds, and that would be any hold that's intended to cause pain or injury, or make the opponent give up because of the threat of injury or because of the pain being too much, or also to lead to unconsciousness and a submission, or what's the word I'm looking for, referee stoppage.
Yeah.
And so all those types of holds fall under a stretcher. Now the thing is, Darby Allin is also really good at that. His technical wrestling bars are also really high. He's very competent at countering those holds and doing those holds himself. Whether he's going to in this match or not varies, though. It might be something where he's not as focused on that when he's fighting MJF. That he feels that isn't advantageous to the story that they're trying to tell, as opposed to against someone like Daniel Garcia. If you see what I'm saying. I mean, I'm sure that in that match you would have seen a lot of that. But as far as MJF and Darby Allin, I definitely would expect to see MJF putting him into a lot of submission holds, and with specific goals. He's going to be trying to neutralize specific offense of Darby Allin. I'm trying to think of what would be applicable there, because I mean there's no submission hold that makes it more difficult to do a coffin drop, if you see what I'm saying. But the biggest thing, he's going to be doing submissions and working body parts in order to lead up to his salt of the earth. So he's going to be working on the arms a lot because of what his submission finisher is.
Yeah. And the last thing that I will say about this, one of the things that I really like that you do is you break down the time of the matches based on their wins and losses. And so for MJF, it's not surprising that the average time that he spends in a win is just over 11 minutes. It's because that's driven down by some of these matches where he's facing jobbers and so he's winning in 30 seconds. But in his 2 losses that you have in the database, he spends an average of almost 22 minutes in those matches. So it seems as though if this match passes the 15-minute mark, we might be trending towards an MJF loss. So this is one where we say it all the time. I don't know. I think most people don't have a clear idea of who's going to win this match. It could go either way. So if you're, if we're, sitting there watching Full Gear and thinking, wow, this match has gone past 15 minutes, might give you a clue as to who's going over in this one.
It's possible. I definitely would not say that MJF is the type like a Will Hobbs or a Wardlow, where if you take him into the deep water, they can't swim there. I think that his that the length, his average time for his wins, like you say, is driven down by very short matches, but that he can win a long match as well. He's not incapable of it. But yeah, Darby Allin is definitely someone who he has an easier. I mean, his advantage grows as the time continues, because his opponents are just wearing themselves out trying to hurt him, because it's very difficult to hurt him because he has a lot of reserves and a lot of endurance and resilience, which is something that they play up in the commentary a lot, to make sure that that this is someone who is very difficult to wear down over time.
Yep, like you said, it's the rope-a-dope strategy, and I think Darby Allin does it better than anyone in AEW right now. Maybe anyone in the world right now.
Well, and he does, but one of the reasons that it's so good is because he doesn't do it every match. That he definitely changes it up and works a different type of match if the opponent and the situation allow it, and he's working against someone where it makes sense for him to go on offense more.
So that's a really good point as well. I'm glad you brought that up. It just again goes to show how much Darby Allin has grown since coming to AEW. The TNT title reign really put that into perspective, that he's grown a lot as a wrestler. And so now being in this level of feud, it just shows that AEW, they're rewarding that growth with real trust. that they don't feel like they need a veteran, or anyone like that to carry Darby Allin through a feud. They're going to give him a young guy who also is, trying to grow as a wrestler, and they're being rewarded right now. AEW is. I think there's no doubt about that. Let's get to the quick hits. We got a few matches, a few smaller things to talk about that I just want to mention. Let's start out with the opening match on Dynamite, CM Punk against Bobby Fish. This was, it being in quick hits is not because it wasn't a good match or it wasn't interesting or anything like that. I think it's just simply because their storyline-wise, there's not a ton to talk about here, and the match itself I thought was pretty much exactly what everyone expected it to be, in that it was a really good match between two really good technical wrestlers, and we got pretty much exactly what we were expecting out of it. The only interesting thing was Bobby Fish. I'm not sure what happened with the finish, if that was the intended plan or what, but Fish almost kicked out of the go to sleep. So I don't, I saw that, I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the thought of, was this a plan or whatever else. But that was interesting about this, I would say.
I'm glad you reminded me of that. I'd forgotten about it, and it was the most noteworthy thing in the match. The match was fine. It didn't thrill me, but it was fine. But I thought that they had a really great solution. To me, I felt like that was a really great solution to, how do you do a spot where someone gets hit with a finisher that's like really deadly, that's like supposed to be sold as nobody kicks out of this, but you want to do a delay cover. Like, okay, this is not a finish that's supposed to keep you down for, you could count to 100.
Yeah.
It's not like that. And the cover's delayed, so how do we make it not look like Bobby Fish is totally useless? Is like, how long could CM Punk have delayed making that cover? The match, I don't remember why it was delayed cover. I think it was just a case of, CM Punk had been pushed far enough that he hit the finish, but then kind of collapsed. And then having Bobby Fish kick out at 3.5 or 3.25 kind of makes it like, oh, that's because it took him a while to make that cover. Mm-hmm. And it made total sense to me. And I think that that's a great way to go, is to say, let people try to kick out, but they didn't quite make it. It makes it feel real that like the 1, 2, 3 isn't just a kayfabe thing, and it wouldn't even matter. Because I could count to 4, I could count to 5. You're never going to kick out because he got hit with this go to sleep. That nobody kicks out of that. It's just, Bobby Fish gave it his best try and just didn't quite make it. And I think that that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you make. I like that the groundwork is being set for, for someone to kick out of the GTS eventually. And for it to be a big moment, but not like an earth-shattering moment, the way that, someone kicking out of like the One-Winged Angel would be. There are different classes of finisher, and AEW in a lot of ways is going back to the Japanese style of wrestling, because in Japan there are different classes of finishers. That, there are guys that have certain moves that will not get kicked out of, but that aren't used all the time. The classic example would be the Burning Hammer. I forget the name of the man who invented it, but he only used it 7 times in his entire career. So that's the classic example of your uber finisher, your mega finisher. And the GTS is not that. The One-Winged Angel is that. The Death Rider variety of Jon Moxley's Paradigm Shift is that. The Paradigm Shift is just the double underhook DDT, but the Death Rider is where he picks the guy up and does that move. In Japan they call it the Death Rider. It's still the Paradigm Shift in AEW. Either way, that's the uber finisher. So I like that there's those kind of 2 classes of finisher being established. One thing about this match, about the graph, you can see from the 3-minute mark into the 10-minute mark, it was just Bobby Fish heat. And CM Punk tried a little comeback there in the 5th minute, and Fish snuffed it out. it's classic pro wrestling, and these guys are, between them, have wrestled thousands of matches. I think between them they have about 40 years of experience. These guys know what they're doing. So, we got the match that we were expecting. Now, CM Punk is getting ready for a match against Eddie Kingston. We'll talk about that one a little bit later on when we get to Kingston's match this week. But yeah, I thought this was pretty much exactly what you'd want to see from a match between these two guys. Let's go to a match of a completely different style. Dante Martin versus Matt Sydal. Now, my mind was completely open going into this with the whole Dante Martin versus Dante Martin and Lio Rush situation. My mind was totally open. This match really won me over. I really liked Lio Rush's involvement in this. I loved the way AEW treated it. Lots of camera cuts. Always when Lio Rush was, trying to do some coaching, and I felt like he really added some energy into this match. Not that a Dante Martin match needs a lot of energy, generally speaking, but I feel like Lio Rush really made a contribution in this one, and it, for me, served as a reminder that we haven't seen Lio Rush in this role for a while. I think the last time we saw him playing this type of character was with Bobby Lashley in WWE, and I think people forget that was a really popular act, and Lio Rush was a really popular character at the time. This is exactly why, because he kind of has that presence, and I really enjoyed this. And obviously, I just love Dante Martin's work. The dude is just an unbelievable athlete, and he showed it once again. And Matt Sydal knows what he's doing. He knew what his job was going to be in this match, and he did it. I really enjoyed this match. What did you think about it?
Oh, it was fantastic. I think that it's just kind of amazing how it's an amazing feud between the two, in the sense that it went from a pure respect feud to what it is now, which is less so. But keeping in mind that although Dante Martin is, has this influence on him that seems kind of heelish. It's kind of ish. It's kind of a gray area of exactly what Lio Rush is right now. But there were 0 fouls. Both men worked a completely clean match. So in a sense, it's still a babyface versus babyface classic, but a little more heated this time, and less of a, we're respecting each other, and we just want to see who is the best man tonight, and a little bit more of heat, and I'm a little sick of you beating me, and finally gets the win. And I don't know. With Lio Rush, I'm not sure if Lio Rush is trying to encourage him to take less risks, and all the things that a heel manager normally would do with a character like that, of let's ground things, let's do this, let's try that. It sounded like he was trying to encourage him to use something else besides the double springboard moonsault, which won the match. I really find their dynamic really fun, just in the sense of Lio Rush just seems like the parent who's given him the given him the talking to before the cameras roll, and he's sort of sulky about it, like, okay, I'm gonna act right because Lio Rush said this and Lio Rush said that, and he just doesn't seem like really into what Lio Rush wants him to do, or how Lio Rush wants him to act. And it's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I agree, and what I liked about it as well was, I'm with you, like, it's ambiguous what Lio Rush wants from Dante, and what the ultimate end goal is. But one thing that really came through in this match is, this doesn't seem like a short-term, Lio Rush is going to betray him as soon as he gets what he wants kind of thing. He seemed like he was genuinely invested in what Dante Martin was doing, and he was really happy when Dante got anything in, and he was totally overjoyed when they ended up winning. So it seemed like at the end there was a bit of that recognition from Dante that maybe this is going somewhere. Like I'm with you. Over the last couple weeks, it seems like, Dante's saying, I'm not really sure if I'm into what Leo wants me to do. And, I'm not sure about this guy. But once he got the win, it seemed like he's starting to come around. And I think having that win be over Matt Sydal, a guy who's beaten him twice before, it really serves as an opportunity for Dante Martin to see, maybe Leo Rush can actually help me out here. Maybe he's got something to offer me.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of Leo Rush's arguments for why Dante should listen to him seemed really facetious. They're just like not credible. Yes, he was saying, well, don't listen to Matt Sydal because he couldn't beat CM Punk. It's like, well, who can? Or vice versa. Like,
Right.
you didn't listen to me and you got beat by I forget who beat him. That he was like, I see you didn't listen to me, and it's like, Tommy End.
Oh, right,
Malachi
yeah,
Black.
Malachi Black, yeah.
And it's
That's
like, well,
right.
yeah, Malachi Black beats everybody. What are you talking about? That has no relevance.
Right.
But finally winning over Sydal, that's a different thing. Like, that's something
Mhm.
that he hadn't been able to achieve before, and now he is. Whether to what extent Leo Rush had to do with it is more of an open question. But what I think was really interesting is that Dante hit his finisher, that double jump moonsault. Sydal basically almost hit his lightning spiral,
Yeah.
and Dante just landed on his feet, and that just was an amazing spot.
Oh God, it was. It really was. Every match, Dante Martin does something that I'm like, is that it? Like, is that something that people do, or is he just some kind of alien? Like this guy's just unbelievable, and he's athletic, and his selling, I think, is really great. I mean, there's obviously parts of his ring psychology that need to be sharpened. He obviously needs experience before he makes the jump into a title picture or anything like that. But obviously the athleticism is there, and I really think the selling is there as well. I mean, he really does the babyface in peril sell, I think, really, really well. And obviously the comeback is there as well. I mean, he like the catapult off the rope, the fact that he like his vertical leap is just ridiculous. One final thing I will say, when he hit the double foot stomp, in the moment, I wanted that to be a snoo finisher. Like he just, because I feel like you could put him against like Omos and he could hit him in the chest with that. Like he could just vertical standing leap up to like a 7-foot guy's chest. I love that move just in general. But yeah, I mean this guy's, I think this guy's going to be great. I'm putting it out there right now. I think Dante Martin is going to be a superstar in AEW. I think he's going to be a future world champion as long as he stays healthy. It seems like this is a can't miss sort of guy here, and maybe Darius is the same way, and we're seeing AEW's next dominant tag team. I'd like for that to be the case. Whatever the case is, this is a guy that I believe in for the future. Sammy Guevara was once a guy that people believed in for the future. Well, he's now the present, and he had a pretty good match against Ethan Page for the TNT title. This one I thought was exactly what you wanted to see from it, and I was happy to hear that the stip was everyone was banned from ringside, because it just let these guys do what they do, and both of these guys are phenomenal pro wrestlers. And so we got, again, just a fairly basic in structure heel versus babyface match, but anything but basic in terms of the execution, because these guys, again, are just fantastic, both in terms of ring psychology and their athleticism and what they do. So there's, very active, I think 56 total strikes in 11 minutes between these guys. Not many strike downs, so you're getting lots of those sort of yay boo spots, lots of strike exchanges, which tend to be really fun the way AEW does them. I really enjoyed this match, and Sammy's reign so far as TNT champion, matches with Bobby Fish and now Ethan Page, and we're gonna get a 10-man tag at Full Gear with American Top Team. I'm really liking Sammy's TNT title reign so far, and to me, the championship is doing exactly what it was supposed to do, which is just go from strength to strength. And Miro got better he started in a much better position because of Darby Allin, who started in a much better position because of Cody Rhodes, and so on. And now Sammy Guevara is starting in a much better position because of Miro, and he's using that momentum to be an even better champion than he would have been.
Yeah, Sammy Guevara is really something. He's a fantastic choice for a TNT champion. This was a really great match. It definitely let me see another side to Ethan Page, who's, mostly comes across as sort of a schmuck. But, like you said, everyone was banned from ringside, so he had to rely just on himself. And although he didn't come out on top, he showed a little something. Yeah, it was a really fun match.
Graph-wise, obviously, have to mention it. It was interesting because you had Sammy Guevara make his comeback halfway through the match, and then he was cut off. And Ethan Page gets, from a minute-by-minute basis, he got the most offense of any 1 minute period in the match, almost 20 offensive spots in a minute towards the end. And then Sammy makes his comeback, and then seemingly in the middle of his comeback wins, which I thought was really cool, because I don't like, that your typical, the babyface comeback looks the exact same every time, and he makes his comeback, gets back even, and then we just go into the rest of the match. Sometimes that works, but I think sometimes you do need to have the babyface just catch that last little bit of momentum and use it to finish things off and win the match. And that's exactly what Sammy Guevara did here. And again, it just shows that, AEW is very willing to play with the typical babyface heel dynamic in a match. And Sammy Guevara is the kind of guy who can do that really effectively. And that's exactly what he did. So, just another notch in the cap for Sammy Guevara, as he hopefully continues a pretty lengthy TNT title reign. At least given the early matches, I'm willing to see a lot more from him as this reign goes on. Let's talk about Cody Rhodes. This is a really interesting one here. We'll get to the inclusion of Andrade and Malachi Black and Pac and all this kind of stuff. But first, I just want to talk about Cody as a character. What are your thoughts on his promo on Dynamite?
I loved it. I really, really enjoyed the promo. It was out of left field. It was really unexpected. I didn't expect him to address the criticism so directly, it was the sort of thing that made you say, here's a guy who seems to genuinely be trying to change my mind. He genuinely wants to convince me that he wants the fans to cheer him. Whether that's because he really does want the fans to cheer him, I don't know if he can do that. Or if he just wants to portray someone who is genuinely, you're going to actually believe that he's upset that the fans aren't cheering him. Because most heels, a big part of their character is that they intentionally provoke boos. It's going to be very interesting to see a character who's genuinely and credibly upset that the fans don't like him. That's it's a really interesting take. And I just you don't know who I am because you haven't walked a mile in my shoes. And then he tosses his shoes out to him like, here, give it a shot. It's like, wow, that's just like such an interesting way to just like really visually put across that idea of like, hey, you haven't been where I've been. You don't know what it's like to grow up under someone's shadow like I have. Not just my father's, but my older brothers too.
Right. Yeah, and he made reference to that. You're exactly right. You said when this first started with Cody, all the way back at the beginning of the Malachi Black thing, you said that you didn't want Cody to officially turn heel. That everyone at the time was saying Cody Rhodes needs to turn heel. This is the time, including me, was saying this is the time, strike while the iron's hot. And you said, no, let Cody be the type of character who thinks he's a babyface and just let the fans turn, and not have Cody change. At the time, I wasn't so sure about that. At this point, I'm very willing for that to be the case. This promo seemed to me like the promo we will remember either for very good or for very bad in a month or two from now. When we know where this story is going with Cody, we're going to look back at this promo and either say, wow, this was the beginning of an incredible story from Cody. We didn't know at the time what we were about to witness, or we're going to look back at this promo and say, this is the worst thing AEW's ever done. Like, it's going to be one of those things, and I'm ready to see it go either way. The history of AEW would suggest that this is going to turn out to be something really good. AEW's earned my trust that when they're gonna step off the cliff and take a real risk, I'm willing to let them do that, because 9 times out of 10 in AEW's history, that risk has really paid off. The last time they did it, they wrote Hangman Page off of TV, and they cut what seemed to be a very obvious storyline between Hangman and Kenny. They cut it off at the knees and just let it sit there for a few months. That was a huge risk, and it evidently paid off. What we're seeing with Hangman now. So after that, I'm willing to let it rest some more. One thing that I thought was so funny about this was that Cody made just such an obvious reference to Triple H, saying, when I got the double underhooks in, I could have done a different move, but I didn't want to, because I didn't want to be, it was too easy to, wield my power as vice president. Like, he's just making so many references to Triple H. And then after the promo, everyone says Cody Rhodes is the Triple H of AEW. Like they don't understand the irony that Cody Rhodes was literally saying, I don't want to be the Triple H of AEW. And I believe him when he says that. But is he going to be the kind of guy who's just genuinely flummoxed by the fact that the fans hate him, and he's like, saying, why do all of you hate me? I'm the good guy. I'm this and I'm that. I'm willing to see him give that a try, because again, I think long term for Cody, I genuinely believe that when this cycle is done, Cody will take some time off. He'll go be with his daughter. He'll go do all of his other responsibilities, whatever. And when he comes back, he is going to be cheered. He's going to be a hero for the rest of his life. I really, really believe that, because he's the guy who made AEW happen. So fans will always associate him with the man who created AEW, and he's going to be cheered for life after this. For right now, with his character, I don't think there's any way he can get fans on his side. So I think for AEW, they have to understand that fans are going to boo him, and so do with that what you will. And whether he's going to be an actual heel or a heel who thinks he's a babyface, either way, I'm excited to see what happens with this. And it doesn't hurt that you have legitimately 3 of the greatest workers in the world right now also attached to this storyline, with Cody Rhodes, who in his own right is one of the best workers in the world, because you have Malachi Black, you have Andrade El Idolo, and you have Pac all mixed into this thing. And we said it last week, any combination of these 4 guys in a match for any reason is just dynamite. No pun intended. Any combination is going to be an incredible match. And so we know we're going to get Cody Rhodes versus Andrade. Presumably we're going to get Malachi Black versus Pac at some point, which, inject that directly into my veins. And then, we might be getting a tag team match with all these guys at Full Gear. I mean, just from a match perspective, it cannot get better than what we're seeing with this story right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting because there's a lot of questionability about people's alignment among those 4. Andrade is a really pretty straightforward heel, but Pac is very tweenerish in a lot of ways,
Yep.
but gets a lot of cheers. And you have Malachi Black, who's very straightforwardly heel, but not treated as one by the fans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting. It's just how will these alliances shake out? Will it be a straightforward alliance between the nominal baby faces and the nominal heels, or will it be a little bit more mixed up because of the fact that that the fans don't see them that way? Um,
That's
you know,
true.
and I think that another interesting thing you were saying that it's really intriguing all of the things that he was willing to address in that promo. And one that I was completely surprised by because I'm just shocked that he's willing to, put it out there into the world. That he said, you know, I could, if I were to go in that direction, and I never intend to break my covenant with you and go after the world championship.
Mm-hmm.
And he put that into the universe, and it just feels like a what do you call it? A Chekhov's gun. It's like, well, now
Yeah.
you've said it, it's almost bound to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I believed that he was very serious about never intending to go after that, and so I'm surprised that he put it into the world and make it seemingly a Chekhov's gun the way that he did.
Right, right. But is it a Chekhov's gun of a Chekhov's gun? Like, did he put it out there knowing that everyone is thinking, well, you said it, so now you're going to break it, and that's always going to be in the back of our minds, but he really never intends to break it. Which,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
me, I would prefer that be the case. I don't have any issue with Cody Rhodes. In fact, I really like Cody Rhodes, despite the fact that right now one of our most popular videos on the YouTube channel is me criticizing Cody Rhodes. I actually really like him, but I don't ever need to see him in the world championship picture. AEW legitimately has so many people that can be in that main event level. I don't think Cody Rhodes needs to be there. Like, the only reason that he should break that stipulation is if there's a legitimate need for him to be in the world title picture. And at least right now, I don't think there is. All three other guys in this feud, Malachi Black, Andrade, and Pac, all of those guys could be in the world title picture tomorrow, and it would be totally believable. It would make great stories. I mean, besides the Hangman and Kenny thing, outside of that, any of these guys would be legitimate world championship contenders and legitimate world champions if they wanted to go in that direction. So no, I don't think there's any need for Cody to be in there, but I agree with you. The fact that he even said it, it's almost like it's one of those things where it's like, we in kayfabe we know that's a stipulation, but you don't say it. These are things we don't talk about, and so you're like, oh, he talked about it, and you just like Cody. I think is so good at that he kind of needles you in that place where you're like, oh, you don't say that, so he's pushing the boundary a little bit. You know what I mean? He is the best in AEW in doing that, in my opinion.
Sure.
Let's wrap up the show by talking about the World Title Eliminator Tournament. Obviously, there's one match that we need to get to because of its implications and just how good it was. But let's start with the easy one first. Bryan Danielson versus Eddie Kingston. I'm kidding. The easy one, the easy one is obviously Jon Moxley versus 10. Now, for me, I said on the podcast last week, I didn't want just a straight squash with 10 because you have to protect your big men. I said it last week, and I still believe that. I think you have to protect your hosses. You can't just job them out, even to someone like Jon Moxley. But if you are going to do it, Jon Moxley is the actual best person to do that to. Because if there's anyone that could believably destroy a giant hoss like 10, it is Jon Moxley, to be fair. So I take it back. The squash here I actually liked. And I liked it because actually Preston Vance showed some color. And it was a fairly obvious blade job, but still he showed some color, and it was actually like it was a lot. It was a lot of blood for like a 2-minute match. So I think these guys knew what they needed to do. And it just plays into, I assume, Jon Moxley's inevitable heel turn, although I'm not gonna say that's a for sure thing. AEW swerved us with stuff like this before. What'd you think about this one?
I agree in the sense that I agree that that the brutality of this match made it. It was purely a match to put over just how brutal and single-minded that Jon Moxley is getting,
Hmm.
and it really builds to the next match. He is going up against Orange Cassidy, and I've been saying for quite some time, well, from the beginning, that that's the match I'm seeing as being the crazy upset. I think that I've made the comparison to Taro Yano in his G1 attempt, and
Hmm.
of course it's different because this is single elimination. But um, it's just a case of he is single-mindedly on getting back to the world title, and everybody else is just an obstacle, and someone for him to brutalize and destroy on his way to his goal, which is all he's looking at. And Orange Cassidy is just too tricky for that. It's not going to, not going in with just brutality and not thinking, not coming in as a thinking man,
Hmm.
as a wrestler, is not going to work when you're up against Orange Cassidy. And I think that he's going to have a really massive setback. And people are like, well, he's going to brutalize Orange Cassidy, and that will lead to his heel turn. It's like, no. After the match, he will brutalize the whole best friends. That will
Hmm.
be good for his heel turn. Losing is good for a heel turn. That's
Hmm.
my perspective on it. And that's what I expect to see on Wednesday. I mean, shoot, if it doesn't turn out that way, Orange Cassidy's a great seller. It'll be
Hmm.
a fun squash if it's a squash, but I don't see it. I think he's gonna. I think he's his whole thing is that he is very tricky, very slippery,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's what we're gonna see.
It's so interesting because you bring a much different perspective into this than I think most people who would think you know Cassidy's just like a speed bump for Moxley, which he's going to take at 1,000 miles an hour into the finals of the tournament, and at that point we're going to get the really interesting matchup between him and now we know is going to be Bryan Danielson. Um, but I'm with you. I don't think it's necessarily going to be that obvious because it's not obvious what the immediate plans for the next world champion is going to be. So, I think for me, it's not even completely obvious that Hangman is going to beat Kenny at Full Gear. I mean, I'm 90% sure that's going to happen, but there's like 10% of me that thinks there might be something here, that they might go a different direction with it. And so, because of that, I'm not 100% sure who's going to win this tournament. And at the end of the day, when you give me a tournament where the winner is not clear and one of the competitors where the character direction is not clear, it makes for some really fun matchups. And so I think anything can happen at this point. Anything could have happened in the other semifinal match, which we're going to talk about in a second. Um, and so for Moxley, he is a threat to everybody, whether he's a babyface or a heel. But if Hangman Page is going to win at Full Gear, Jon Moxley being his first opponent, like a vicious killer heel Jon Moxley, that is a great first opponent, I think, for Hangman Page because it immediately positions Page as a legitimate champion. AEW is well aware of the fact that when you are a challenger that has so much heat behind you and so much fan support and the story is so good that oftentimes the title reign itself is actually not as good as the challenge for that title. And there are guys in AEW that know that really well. Malachi Black, when he was Aleister Black in NXT, his pursuit of the NXT title was legendary. His title reign, not so much. Kenny Omega himself, his pursuit of Kazuchika Okada's world championship, legendary. His reign, I mean, it was good, not the same. So these guys know exactly what could happen if the title reign itself is not set up the same way that the dash, the challenge for the title is. So I think positioning Jon Moxley as a first opponent for Hangman Page where you have legitimately the best promo in the business and Jon Moxley as your first opponent, it's a win-win situation because it really puts Page, it starts him off on the right foot for the title reign. So if that's the direction they want to go in, I'm totally fine with that. And a potential Jon Moxley versus Bryan Danielson match, that's going to be killer. All of that being said, Bryan Danielson could serve the same purpose. And so if they want to pull off a more character-driven turn for Moxley where he loses and then attacks the best friends, like you said, that can absolutely work as well. And we'll see where Moxley goes as a character after that. So options are open here. And that's exactly what you want out of a tournament. Let's talk about...
Absolutely. Well, no, before we move on.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you that that Moxley or Danielson are more likely as the overall winner, even though I'm leaning towards Orange Cassidy eliminating Moxley. But if he does, it's not because he's going to win overall. So that leaves you with Moxley or Danielson as the first as the next challenger, which is great because that doesn't spoil the main event.
Right.
Because either of those guys would be fantastic next challengers for Kenny, and either of those guys would be fantastic first challengers for Hangman. And unusually strong first challengers for Hangman. I mean, a lot of times you get a new champion and they have a couple of he's not going to lose it right away, so we're not going to throw someone who's a really strong challenger at him right away because nobody is going to buy them winning, so why not save them for when they will?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that's definitely not the way that they seem to be going with this. Assuming Hangman's going to be the next champion, if he's going to face either Danielson or Moxley, that's a huge first challenge, right?
Right.
And either would be fantastic, amazing matches and feuds. So
Yep.
No way to go wrong here.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And literally all three guys left, there's no indication, whichever one of them wins, who is going to be the winner of the main event of Full Gear. And I don't think Orange Cassidy's going to win. I don't think that possibility is out there. But if it did, still I don't think that's an indication of who will win the main event. So again, it's great tournament booking from AEW, who has struggled in the past with giving away their world champion based on who wins a tournament like this. Like, they gave away the fact that Jon Moxley would retain at Full Gear last year because Kenny Omega won the tournament, which is fine. I thought there was no issue with that, but again, AEW has struggled with that in the past. This one, that is not going to be an issue, like you said. So let's talk about the other semifinal match. We made enough references to it. This, I think, undoubtedly was the best singles match of the week. Might have been the best match of the week, period. Might have been better than the 8-man tag in the main event of Dynamite. Bryan Danielson versus Eddie Kingston. This, to me, I wouldn't say a critic of Eddie Kingston, but I've been willing to point out that Kingston's flaw as a wrestler is his in-ring work. His promos, his character is much better than what he's usually able to pull off in the ring. I think Bryan Danielson, it's a combination of Kingston improving as a worker in AEW, being around all this talent, and Bryan Danielson just being a phenomenal wrestler in his own right, that these guys physically pulled off just an incredible match. And it was brutal. The strikes thrown, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was like these two guys just legitimately hitting each other for 16 and a half minutes. The commentator several times made reference to the King's Road style that was made popular in All Japan in the 90s. I could definitely see that. At times, this was much more strong style than King's Road style, which is fine with me. Both these guys are just phenomenal at that, and I just really enjoyed this match. So I'm not going to bother asking you whether you enjoyed it or not. I think I already know the answer. So let me ask you instead, what made this match so compelling?
What made this match so compelling is what Eddie Kingston is fantastic at. You may have criticisms of his conditioning or of his execution of specific moves, the smoothness of execution, things like that.
Mm.
But the thing that he's a master at is storytelling and structure, which leads into guess who his next feud is with. Um, but yeah, they had a fantastic match, which led to an amazing climax a minute or 2 minutes before the actual end of the match. Jericho called it out at the time and was just like, ever of, just you don't see this every day. This is
Mhm.
not something you see as someone giving you, the audience giving you a standing ovation when the match isn't even over yet.
Yeah.
Just the way that they built to that back fist, and then both wrestlers collapsing in exhaustion, and then the fans just appreciating that moment,
Mhm.
and it's just amazing structure and build, and storytelling.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I loved the Brock Lesnar Undertaker spot at the end where because it was the exact same thing. And Bryan Danielson, like, he has never done a triangle choke in his entire AEW run as of yet. He just randomly pulls one out. It's the exact same. Obviously Undertaker calls it the Hell's Gate, and Kingston does, flips him off the Brock Lesnar thing, and he passes out. It's like I don't know if that I don't know if that was apropos of anything, or if that they just wanted to do that. They both were aware of that spot. Obviously Danielson has fought both Brock Lesnar and the Undertaker, so he knows both those guys, and he had a phenomenal match with Lesnar. It was so perfect. It was so perfect that last thing, because again, for Kingston, he is the kind of guy you always struggle with, a guy who is too tough to tap out. And Kingston is the absolute embodiment of that kind of character. So how do you make it work? A year ago, he passed out in Moxley's Bulldog choke. And then they had an I Quit match, and Moxley made him say I quit. A year later, he again passes out, and he's, defiant to the last with the middle finger. It's just perfect. You can't do it all the time, but it's one of those things that you don't have to overthink it. You don't have to say, oh, well, Lesnar and Undertaker did it, so we got to do something else. No, Lesnar and Undertaker did it because it works. So just do it. It's fine. And again, it worked here. It gave me chills. It was fantastic. It's just a great call to do that in this spot. And I agree. The fact that it seemed like the climax of the match happened a minute or two before that was just icing on the cake. So this finish seemed to just come out of nowhere, and that's exactly what it should have been. Because I think if they had tried to build up another climax, it wouldn't have worked. I think the fans would have been burned out, because they were now on their third hour of wrestling.
True.
And this match had brought them through the ringer, so they legitimately would have burned out if they had tried this again. But no, it was a quick finish, and it got the fans involved. And these are just two men who, from a ring psychology and structure perspective, like you said, these are two of the absolute elites in the world right now.
And a couple of things that leads to. First off, it's interesting. I was very surprised by the referee of the match. Rick Knox,
Interesting.
not a guy you see in singles matches very often.
Yeah, it's true.
And at the end, in the interrupted interview segment bit that they did, it's like, oh, that makes sense, because if they had thrown in, who's the guy who usually refs those types of matches? Um, uh, the little bald guy. If they had thrown him in, it would have been a case of
Bryce Remsburg.
Bryce Remsburg. Thank you. It would have been like, well, we already dealt with that between Bryce and
Kingston.
And Kingston,
Yeah.
when it happened last year. And it would seem like, well, didn't you guys already work that out between the two of you? But this is a different ref, and you've got Eddie Kingston harping on that same issue again of, I didn't tap out. What the hell are you calling for the bell for? It's like, it's very consistent. It's Kingston being Kingston, and leading into this next feud with CM Punk, and just
Hmm.
I've got every hope that they have no intention of just throwing that in as a Dynamite match in the next couple weeks, or a Rampage
Yeah.
match. That this is a feud that's going to run a couple weeks and lead to a pay-per-view blow off, and that's just the perfect thing for Punk to be doing right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these two guys, I mean, just promo wise, you know, we're into something, and I think character wise, Kingston playing the heel, but you know, not just like a dastardly heel the way that CM Punk has come across before with Team Taz, for example, but more of just like a total killer. Which it seemed to me like that's the direction we're going to go based on the way that this feud kicked off backstage. And CM Punk has an edge to him as well. You know, just saying to Eddie Kingston, you know, I saw what happened out there. Don't make me put you to sleep again. You know, that kind of thing. And that's like, you say that, and, you know, we see anyone who watches traditional sports, there are things that athletes say to each other that you just know. Like, you have these alpha males here, and there's just things that they say that you know are going to get to guys. And Punk saying, don't make me put you to sleep again, you know that that's just going to get Kingston. I mean, that's just going to be the one thing that he can't hear. And one of the things that I really liked about this, I may be the only person in the world that is actually nerdy enough to notice something like this, but when they actually went to that, the backstage angle, the positioning of the camera, such that when Eddie Kingston walked in front of it, he looked massive. Like he looked like an absolute giant. And he's not actually that big in real life. I mean, he's bigger than me, but he's not like a huge guy. But the way that they positioned him there, and then actually having Ruby Soho being involved, which I thought was great because, again, she's kind of small. So Kingston just looks huge. And it's like, it's one of those things that I think it just came across to me that he is not playing around. And physically, mentally, from a character perspective, the way that they had to bleep out every other word he was saying, like, it all coalesced into this Kingston character that is not joking around. He's not playing games at this point. And it leads into a story that I'm with you. If we get a couple of weeks of promos, a couple of weeks of build where Kingston is going to explain to CM Punk that this is not, you know, this is not just a match. You know, this isn't just like I'm going for a 3 count. You know, this is legitimately the biggest thing in Eddie Kingston's life at this time. And for CM Punk, it might not be. You know, Punk has all of these other things going around, and Kingston, he's just laser focused on this one match with CM Punk. I really like the way the story seems to be coming together based on the way the characters were presented just in this one backstage segment.
Mm-hmm. Yep, true, and it's all very consistent. Kingston is the loose cannon, and always has been, of the guy that will come out and get on a mic and interrupt things when you don't expect him in the least. Like that one time there was a main event, and he just came out and started ranting at the end of the show, and it was like, who invited you? How are you relevant to what's happening? But it just made everything seem not choreographed, not planned.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, there's no controlling this guy.
Yeah.
And he does a great job of portraying that, of this wild loose cannon that nobody really can tame.
Yeah, it's so well said, and that's something that he's cultivated in AEW. What's amazing about the way Kingston talks and the way his character works is he is an AEW company guy. I mean, he didn't start as part of AEW, but he came in, and you know, every time he does interviews, when he talks to anyone, all he does is praise AEW, thank AEW. Like he is an AEW guy, and yet he does such a phenomenal job of seeming like he's still not part of AEW. Like if the storyline was this guy's not under contract, what the hell is he doing here? It would still make sense even over a year later. And he came into AEW not under contract as just a guy who was tired of Cody Rhodes' shit. They got into a match, and now a year later, here he is, and it still seems like he's this outsider that doesn't play by AEW's rules and is still like an indie guy. He has that indie edge, and he still performs at indie events. Like he's still that guy, and it's just a great job from him and AEW, allowing him to continue to play that character, do what he's going to do, and still make it work in the context of the stories that they want to tell. It's a masterstroke of booking with Eddie Kingston, and he just makes it work because of his promos and who he is and his ring psychology. This is a guy who does more with so much less than most guys have to work with. You know, if you look at his athletic ability and his physical stature and all of that, he doesn't come across as a main eventer, but when he opens his mouth, you realize this guy is that level. And so, you know, good on him for being able to make that happen. Let's talk about finally Danielson, though, where Bryan Danielson can go from here. Because while Eddie Kingston's direction seems pretty clear and we're all excited for it, Bryan Danielson's, I think, is anything but. Because, like we just said, he could win the tournament and he could not win the tournament. Either way. And there's really no way to tell which one. So, for me, it still seems like they just kind of dangled that, you know, that prospect of Bryan Danielson, Kenny Omega 2. And they know we all want it because we didn't get a winner the first time. So they're just sort of leaving that out there. It's like, are we going to get it? Is it going to be for the title? You know, like, how are we going to go about, you know, bringing this story forward? And I'm still rooting for that. But there's just that little kernel of uncertainty that maybe that's not Danielson's next step. Maybe he's going to go in another direction that isn't Kenny Omega right now. So, Sergi, from your perspective, do you think it would be a mistake if AEW doesn't give us Danielson versus Omega in some sense as his next feud?
Oh no, that I wouldn't be surprised if it's Omega, but I wouldn't be surprised if he just keeps taking on whoever as they come along. It does definitely. It is an argument against my idea that Orange Cassidy is going to upset Moxley, because one direction that they could go is for Moxley to be the first to beat Danielson and to move on to feud for the title, and then, you know, Moxley of course wants his revenge on Kenny Omega, and that's been his motive for months and months, ever since Winter is Coming. Yep. But you know, if Kenny beats him first, as we all kind of expect, that leaves him like, well, I'm still number one contender, and it leaves Kenny Omega and Danielson at loose ends, and free to go at each other with no title involved.
It's I thought that with Kenny and Danielson, I thought that I wanted to see a title on the line when those two go at it again. Now I don't really care so much about that. I think that these guys can have a great match. I mean, they can have a legendary match with or without the title. I don't think it's really important, as long as the story is there. And so the typical booking of things like this would suggest that it's going to be Danielson versus Moxley in the tournament finals, and somehow Kenny Omega and the Elite are going to cost Danielson the match. I don't think that's going to be the direction here. I think you could do that, but to me it would almost cheapen the fact that the end of this is supposed to be Moxley or somebody being the next number one contender, right? So you have to keep that in mind. So you don't want to just sacrifice your next number one contender just so that we can get a slightly more heated feud between Danielson and Omega. And I think, if anything, that might tip AEW's hand more about the way the main event's going to go down than whoever the winner of this tournament might be. So I'm okay with Kenny Omega and Bryan Danielson just having a straight up feud between them without the constraints of a championship. Because if anything, a title might constrain these two from the story that they would want to tell. So if that's the direction they want to go, if they want to do Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson as Omega's next feud, I'm fine with that. But if they wanted to hold off on that until what would be the next pay-per-view in the cycle? I'm now forgetting. Until whatever the next pay-per-view will be. If they wanted to hold off on Omega Danielson until that point, that's fine too. If they wanted to do it at the next Dynamite special event, that's fine too. If they wanted to do it on the first show on TBS, because I think that's coming in January, that's fine too. I mean, literally whatever you want to do with these two guys, as long as they fight each other again. I mean, you could do it in a warehouse on a Tuesday and broadcast it on YouTube. I'm fine with that. As long as these two guys fight again, that's all I want. So again, I think it's a masterstroke of booking for this tournament to make it so that whoever the winner is, it's not obvious. And whoever the winner of this match was going to be, it wasn't obvious. Because I was pretty sure that Danielson was going to win, but as the match went on, I was like, man, like we saw what Jon Moxley did. What if it's Moxley versus Kingston in the finals? Would that really solidify Moxley's heel turn? If he were to do something to Kingston in the finals, and that of course would mean that Kingston would have to beat Danielson. So during the match, when Kingston hit the back fist, I was like, is that the finish? Like, is Kingston going to win it? I legitimately thought that might have been the finish of this match. So again, it's unpredictability that is the strength of this tournament right now. And to bring everything full circle, you said earlier on that it's unfair to always criticize a match for knowing who the winner is going to be. And I agree with you that there are some matches that it doesn't matter whether you know or whether you think you know who the winner is or is not, that if it's a good story, it's a good story. But I really think that in this tournament, it is such a strength that we don't know who the winner of any particular match is going to be. Besides Moxley, besides Danielson in the first round, there's been very few times where we really knew with 100% certainty who the winner is going to be. And now that's out the window. The semifinals and finals, it's just no idea. And it's great. That's exactly what a tournament should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, you can't afford to do those matches too often, which is why they didn't do those types of matches in the first round. People complained, like, what is 10 doing here? That kind of thing. It's like, well, they're there to lose. It's too much to put really competitive guys on every level. They should the competitive guys should get an easy first round match. That makes sense. That's fine. That's a lot like the 4 top women getting buys in the TBS tournament. It's like a buy when you get an easier competitor in the first round.
Yeah.
But the next round, that's a different thing. And you're going against somebody that's on your level, and that doesn't happen very often in AEW because AEW likes to protect their guys. They don't want to throw the competitive matches at you all that often because that's going to lead to degrading their value.
Yep.
But at the same time, you got to get them once in a while. You need those matches every once in a while, and a tournament's a great place to see them. Like, hey, you've gotten past that first round. You're on that level where who knows who's going to win because any of you could be the next number 1 contender. Why not? Between Orange Cassidy, Eddie Kingston, Bryan Danielson, and Jon Moxley, any of those guys could be the next number 1 contender. I mean, Orange Cassidy's unlikely, but it's not impossible. And and Eddie Kingston, would be very surprised if he had been the next number 1 contender, but I wouldn't have been too surprised if he had beaten Danielson through some fluke because of exactly what you said. Danielson, Kingston versus Moxley would be a fantastic final.
You're absolutely right. One final thing that I will say, this is it's so different from the Eliminator tournament this time last year, because the tournament last year was exactly the opposite. There was a sense of inevitability that we would get Kenny Omega versus Hangman Page in the finals. And certainly that Omega would be in the finals in some capacity. That inevitability was there. But I thought it was a strength of that tournament because the story they were telling was that it was inevitable that it was going to be Kenny Omega. I mean, that was the actual story. And it was great because the lead up for a year into that story was that why has it not been Kenny Omega? And so the inevitability added to that sense that, something's going to happen and it's going to be Kenny Omega. It's going to be Omega versus Page. This year, because the heat is in Omega versus Page now for the world title, there needs to be, I think, much more unpredictability involved in this tournament because there is not an obvious next guy. The obvious next guy is currently in the World Championship title picture. He's going to have his match. So now you can take advantage of the fact that because our obvious guy is there, now we can give you a non-obvious guy. We can now play with the characters. We can give you a tournament that is entertaining because of the matches that we're putting on, rather than because of the story that we're trying to tell with the tournament as the vehicle. There's room for both in wrestling. You can have a tournament be a vehicle for a specific story, or you can have the tournament itself be the story. Last year we had the former. This year we have the latter. And AEW has shown proficiency in doing both. And for the TBS title tournament, it's a mix of both. So I think now when AEW announces a tournament of any kind, we should all be excited because we know that whatever is happening around the scene for which that tournament is being announced, we're going to get something good. I think AEW has proved that.
Yep, for sure. I just hope that sometime we get like a big round robin tournament, a G1 style thing. They haven't given any indication that that's something they're interested in doing or hinted at doing that, but it sure would be fun.
Well, I'll tell you this, with the Owen Hart Memorial Tournament that they announced a couple months ago, they've just got that sitting in the back pocket. So how are they going to do that? Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they've announced any details about how that tournament's going to go. I don't think they've said if it's going to be a single elimination tournament or if it's going to be round robin or whatever the case may be. So that's just sitting there for them to use. And you're absolutely right. The fact that, they've done such a good job, I want to see them do more of a G1 style, but put their own spin on it. I mean, don't just do a G1 but in America. Put the AEW spin on the way they do it. G1s are booked much differently than what we've seen AEW do so far. So I would like to see them use both. And I don't think anyone knows more about excellence in booking in a G1 than Kenny Omega. So, I mean, this is a guy who's been there. He knows what that style tournament is about and what it's designed to convey. And I mean, obviously he's not the only one, but he's the guy who comes to mind when you think of excellence in a G1. So I'm here for it. If that's the direction they want to go in, I'm here for it. And that really is the message I think of most of this podcast is whatever direction AEW wants to go, we're in. There's a lot of unpredictability right now surrounding most of their matches at Full Gear. And that's a good thing because they've proven to me, and I think to most of us, that whatever direction they want to go in, it's going to be fun. It's going to be entertaining. And that's all you really need from a wrestling promotion heading into a pay-per-view like this one. So folks, I want to say thank you for joining us on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. AEW just continues to get hotter as Full Gear is coming up. We're less than 2 weeks away now from Full Gear. So how is this going to go? I'm really excited to see this go down. So thank you so much for joining us here on the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast. You know what's coming next. Sergi, please tell the people where they can find you.
Well, I'm sure that my Twitter address is right there on the video or whatever the case may be. Of course. The description. I'm on Twitter, and I do reasonably regular columns for Pro Wrestling Musings on ranking the factions in AEW and the Styles Make Fights series, and trying to get the Styles Make Fights columns out reasonably regularly. Not quite weekly, but well, do my best. Hopefully, find some time to put one out before Wednesday on this Orange Cassidy versus Moxley match.
I would love to see that. Are there two guys more stylistically different than Orange Cassidy and Jon Moxley?
Possibly not. It's quite a style clash for sure.
That old the old chestnut, a clash of styles. Well, now it's meaningful. It really is a clash of styles between Cassidy and Moxley. So definitely go read that. I love Styles Make Fights. And go, get into a discussion with Styles Make Fights. I know that's one thing that you've always been looking for, and it really is. It's so interesting when you actually not just read the article, but really start to put your thoughts down on paper, and you start thinking about, you start seeing wrestling matches in a much different way. And Sergio always loves to hear when people read Styles Make Fights and realize that, they're seeing wrestling in a different way than they were. So definitely do that. Hit him up on Twitter, comment on the site, whatever you want to do. That's something that we all appreciate. I have been Griff from GA. You can check out my personal YouTube channel at General Admission Wrestling. And also, I'm going to get an extra plug in there. I apologize. But you can also check out my new YouTube channel over at CFC. It's all about gaming. We have a lot of fun over there, so go check that out. Check out ProWrestlingMusings.com. Check out the Pro Wrestling Musings YouTube channel. We're pumping out a lot of content here, folks. So if you can't watch all of it, it's totally fine. Whether you're on the website, whether you're on Twitter, whether you're on the YouTube, there's always going to be something new for you from Pro Wrestling Musings Wrestling. Pro Wrestling Musings. It took me about 2 hours, but I finally tripped up on saying that. Thank you all so much for being here with us. We will see you with the Pro Wrestling Musings podcast next week. Until then, enjoy AEW, enjoy your post-Halloween week, enjoy the beginning of winter, and we will see you next time. We appreciate you.